Hey, this is Enaa, in with you in the Fight Back, and this is a follow-up to my video on the two terrors. In part one, I looked at compared the terror, say, of the French Jacobins to the terror that lasted much longer of feudalism in France, and I kind of want to focus on the first terror, the terror that comes with revolutions. And I want to qualify some of my remarks. When I talk about expropriating and eliminating classes, I don't necessarily mean killing them, the members of those classes. And I want to go into that. For instance, I don't think prison massacres are a good idea, arming children. I'm not celebrating that. I don't think revenge should be the guiding element of a revolution. But think about it for a second. In these entrenched systems of power, whether it's capitalism or feudalism, you have these elites, these rich and powerful people who have been oppressing and exploiting the masses for, in sometimes generations and centuries. And they need to be removed. That's not negotiable. That's not something we're going to compromise on. And to do that, you need to go to extreme to right the wrongs of the ancient regime, whether it's peasants assaulting landlords, workers revolting against capitalists, or whatnot. That's what happens. And these things happen in the course of real revolutions. As Mao said, it's not a dinner party. It's an act of violence. It's not something neat and tidy that you can tie up and, paint up. It's nitty-gritty and it's real. And we need to understand that's part of any revolutionary process. We can explain these acts of violence. That doesn't necessarily mean those acts have to be necessarily justified. I think in the case of the Jacobin Terror and the Red Terror during the Russian Civil War, emphatically yes. But reactionaries deserve to be removed from power. That's non-negotiable, and it tends to be done violently. And this isn't because revolutionaries are necessarily bloodthirsty maniacs, but because there's normally little choice in the matter. In France, to really rip up the feudal system, they had to go to extremes. In China, it had to be done in extremes. There was a revolutionary war going on. Peasants were rising up. People were fighting back. And if you look at colonial oppression, it's not just political. It's not just Britain controls India politically, but economically. They control the economy of India. And if you look at colonial oppression, you can say India, yeah, they removed colonialism non-violently. In a certain sense, they did. India became a politically independent state. But it really didn't fundamentally change the structure of that society, because the economic elite was largely unchanged. There's still a basic class structure of exploitation and, workers suffering and peasants suffering. And a real revolution, if it targets entrenched elites, is going to encounter violence of that ruling class. On the other hand, if you look at what happened in China, which did free itself from colonial rule totally in 1949, there was violence done against landlords. And peaceable revolutions are, unfortunately, tend to be rather compromising, and they're not really willing to attack entrenched systems of power. They may do it partially. The participants may have the noblest intentions of mind, but that doesn't mean their enemies do. And we can see this in the sense where in Chile, under Salvador Allende, who sought to bring socialism peaceably to Chile, encountered the entrenched violence of the ruling class. They had conviction. The Allende government, I would say, not quite as much. Now, when it comes to the questions of terror, should revolutionaries advocate torture, the massacre of innocents, doing the same to the oppressors that was done to the oppressed? In a sense, look at it this way. Someone is raped. Does that mean that the person who raped them should be raped in turn? No. You're doing unto others that was done to you, and in that sense, it's counterproductive. It's not going to build that new society. A revolution is about emancipating all of humanity and building a new way of life. And that way of life, the name I give to it is communism. A revolution should be about sharply differentiating between ourselves and the old regime. Granted, there are excesses. Granted, there's terror. That's what happens. That's the reality. To destroy these entrenched systems of power, you've got to be willing to go all the way. And if you saw my review of Trotsky's Terrorism and Communism, I pretty much endorse that. But if you look at it the other side, those people who are on the bottom and have suffered, they do go to the excess. And I ask you, what do you expect after 1,000 years in, say, France, of cold-blooded repression? What defines a revolution, though, is not the body count. Revolutions are about transcending the old society and building a new way of life. If you watch the mini-series Spartacus, which aired about maybe 10 years ago, I don't know, there's a scene in that where the Spartacus and the slaves have been freed, and it's suggested, what do we do now? And someone says, we should enslave the Romans. And Spartacus says, no. Just as I would not be the slave, I would not be the master, because it degrades both in turn. A revolution is violent. It involves going to extreme. In China, there was, for instance, when the landlords were expropriated, there were some who didn't want to give them any land at all. There were others who wanted to just give them enough land to live on. And at least in China, there was this chance for the remolding of the former oppressed. And when I say that we need to go to the extremes, we need to wipe clean the old society. As I said, that's not negotiable. But we have to put something better in its place. And if we don't do that, it's a problem with the nature of the society we're trying to build. And we need to do what we can to differentiate between ourselves and the old society. If not, we're just going to restore what we sought to abolish. Anyway, this is Enaa, in with you in the Fight Back.